This time on Second Chance Ohana.
Hey guys, today we have this used nightstand. It's a little Ikea nightstand that we bought off of Facebook Marketplace for $10. This is going to be one piece of the furniture makeovers happening in my daughter's room because we're redoing her room with a ocean beach inspired theme. We are going to do something totally different for the tabletop. My daughter and I are going to do the top to sort of look a little bit like this, if you can kind of imagine that. This is the goal for the top, and then we have a special hydro dipped knob that we're gonna add to the front too. So it should be the perfect addition to her beach themed room. Aloha, I'm Dani. In 2016, I moved from Maui to Arizona with my husband to be closer to my mom and pops, who lived just a few miles away. On our journey, Kyle and I expanded our family by adopting 3 tweens, and of course Barkley, who helps make sure everyone feels like part of the Ohana. Mom and I love to hunt for used furniture and restore it, because it's fun to be creative, use power tools, and of course make money. And because, like people, sometimes furniture just needs a second chance. Every furniture flip starts the exact same way. We start by cleaning. And today I was just using a TSP alternative that I sprayed on, wiped off, and then rinsed one more time with some water. We do this to get all the grime and gunk off so that we actually know what we're working with. And so when we start sanding, nothing gets in the way. Obviously take off your hardware, whatever's there. And then we start the sanding. So you'll have to decide if you want to do a deep sand to get down to bare wood, or if you're just going to scuff sand and add paint. You can see that we actually do a little bit of both. Once I started sanding down those legs, I saw what beautiful wood was underneath and knew we had to keep them natural. But sanding around all of this stuff would be a little complicated to make sure we got all the white off. So using those IKEA directions and working backwards, we disassembled pieces of this so that we could completely sand down the legs to bare wood. Okay, so I had to use the IKEA directions to figure out how to take this apart, and goodness gracious, I still couldn't get it apart. Took a little elbow grease to finally get it out of there. So after sanding these legs down, I wiped some mineral spirits on them just to see what the natural wood actually looks like. This gave me the idea of whether I wanted to stain them or keep them natural looking, and we chose to keep them natural. We actually realized it's going to be so much easier just to take this little IKEA nightstand completely apart so we can get in every nook and cranny. So I wanted to keep these legs looking as natural as possible, but polyurethane even darkens them just a little bit. So we have this amazing dead flat varnish that is just this matte clear coat that protects the wood and leaves it looking exactly the same. After taking this whole thing apart, I couldn't believe how many pieces there were to this tiny nightstand. And even though the table was already white, I obviously wanted to give it a fresh coat of paint, so we started with the primer and then we moved on to our white paint. My favorite method for painting these things is to add some polyurethane into the final coat and then to brush it on and roll over it so there's no brush strokes. It always blows my mind how assembling IKEA furniture is so dang difficult, especially when it's so tiny. So yes, I may or may not have been watching a YouTube video of this assembly project so that I could put it all back together a week later. Remember those hydro dip knobs Sammy and I made a couple weeks ago? We even have the tutorial if you didn't get to check it out. I'll link it right up here in the top right hand corner. but they look perfect on this white and wood nightstand. Finally, it's time for this tabletop. So this is where all the magic is gonna happen. In order to start, we just want to add some paint with that sand and the blues to represent the ocean. And this is all gonna be covered, but we wanna make sure to do this in case our resin is a little transparent. We don't want them just to see white underneath. So go ahead and watch how this part all comes together. All right, day one. Let's get this epoxy party started. So the very first thing we're gonna do is make sure that our piece is completely level. That way, when the resin falls off, it falls off evenly and doesn't head all to one direction. All these products are linked in our description below. And really what you're gonna need is an epoxy and a hardener, and then some colors, some pigments to put in that resin to get the color and the feel you're going for. And we're even gonna use some sand that we got straight out of our backyard to include in the tan pigment to make it look like a sandy beach. All right, we're gonna jump ahead to day two because day one was kind of a disaster. Everything dried too quickly, so we didn't even get the chance to blend our waters. We didn't even get to add our waves. So we have a plan for day two. One thing to note is the safety precautions you need to take when using epoxy. This is incredibly strong stuff, so we're both using respirator masks. They look a little different, but they both get the job done. And don't forget gloves. Nitrile gloves are ideal, but I didn't have any on hand, so we both just used dishwashing gloves, and they work perfectly to protect our skin. Sweet Barkley, we love you, but you can't be out here right now. Your fur is gonna end up in this and we'll never be able to get it out. So when using epoxy, you're gonna mix part A, the actual epoxy, with part B, the hardener. You're gonna have to stir them together really, really well to make sure that they're gonna settle and harden like solid glass. And this is where we went wrong yesterday. We were trying to make each pigment one at a time. It made so much more sense today to put all of them, make them all at the same time. I promise, I did not write "I love you, Dani" on one of these cups. These are just leftovers that I save and use for this purpose specifically from our coffee shop. So I poured sand directly into the resin with the pigment, so it'll actually be a textured resin when it dries. And doesn't that look just like the beach? Much better than day one. So after the sand, we moved on to that dark resin, the deep depths of the ocean. We made sure to pretty much pour everything we had because a lot you're gonna lose over the edges, and you want to do that because you want to make sure the resin falls over the edges so you have a nice clean line on the end, and you even can take a popsicle stick to make sure everything's coated on the edge. On to the medium. Now this is where you really start getting that ocean feel. So after we pour it on, we're gonna blend it with the dark to make sure they don't just look like striped lines on this tabletop. And make sure you're taking that resin all the way to the edges as well on both sides. One thing to keep in mind as you're mixing is keep your pace going. So we're obviously in Arizona, it's still summer, and this stuff dries fast. So I don't want to lose my opportunity to fill the entire board and to get our waves in. So I'm gonna do what I can, but I know that I have a little bit of work time. But if you really want a lot of work time to play, get artist resin, not this tabletop resin, because that gives you more time to play with your resin before it dries. So the only problem with using sand from our backyard is that the sand is a bunker sand. And so there's little pebbles and rocks, so we had to make sure to pick those out. And then we wanted to give it a shape that our white waves are going to be attached to. So after that light turquoise color, it's time to bring in the clear. And the purpose of this is so that when we have the waves, we can blow the waves out and they have clear to go into so they don't just mix with the blue right away. And so now we just want to warm everything back up so we can start blending those blues together before we add any of the white waves. All right, who's ready to surf? It's time for some waves. So now we're just gonna add the white epoxy resin on top of blues and all the different places we wanna have waves on this tabletop. So these waves down here, these waves are the most important because these are the ones that are closest to the front of the table that you're going to see the most often, and it's just where you logically think of waves being at the edge of the shore. So we're going to make it nice and thick and use that heat gun to blow those waves out. So now we're going to come to the other side of the project and we're going to push those waves forward just like waves are naturally pushed forward from their backside towards the shore. So the last thing we're going to do on this day 2 is to blow torch all over, and this pops the air bubbles to make sure that when it dries, it's nice, solid, like crystal clear glass. We're adding more white waves, and this is going to give us depth because you're going to be able to see the waves from day 2 below the clear, and now you're going to see a little brighter the top waves. And this gives it a really natural look like you'd actually see from a plane over the ocean. All right, so if you're gonna try this epoxy resin, this is my favorite tip. On the bottom of your piece, make sure to put blue or green tape on the bottom, and then when it's all dry, with your heat gun, slowly peel it all up, and it's going to melt the resin just enough so that you can peel those drips right off. And for the final reveal, let's see how it looks. Ta-da! Don't you think that's gonna look great on her nightstand? Okay, so I really wanted to find a perfect little oceany wallpaper for the inside, but I didn't want to pay 30 bucks to use for this one little piece, and I couldn't find anything I loved. So this drawer insert, I've just sanded it down, and I'm just gonna paint it with one of the acrylic blues that we used in the epoxy. But anything to get rid of those stripes. All right, time to put this drawer back in and the tabletop on. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a mask in my own home, I do have COVID at the time of this filming. I think I even still had a fever, but I was so bored and so sick of watching TV. Okay, one thing I completely missed when we started this project was that there is a front and there is a back. The holes are not in the exact same spot symmetrically, so I had to drill new holes to make sure I could attach this to the nightstand. And I had to make sure that I drilled them just deep enough for the pegs to go into, but not too deep that it would go through the resin. And on my fourth hole, oh man, you guys, I was so frustrated. I think I still had a fever. On my fourth hole, I drilled a hole all the way through the resin. Like I don't even know what to do to fix this. I am a strong, confident woman, and I know I can fix this, even though I just want to be done with this project. So I mixed a tiny amount of epoxy resin with a little bit of the light blue and used a teardropper to squeeze it in, which worked out great until a day later when it dried and it shrunk just a little bit. So I had to add a second layer as well. Yay, we are done with this nightstand. Let's take a look back to see how it all started. And look at it now. You wouldn't even recognize it as the same little Ikea nightstand. We love the way it turned out. Sammy is so excited for this to go in her newly renovated room. So let's talk numbers really quick. We spent $10 on this piece. We bought it from Facebook Marketplace. I already had all these epoxy materials, but let's round up and say the materials cost about $20 and then $5 of paint, primer, sanding equipment. So our all-in cost for this project max was $35. Not bad for a one-of-a-kind nightstand. And we hope you'll tune in next week because we're going to be revealing Sam's complete room makeover, where she goes from a little tween girl into a teenager. So make sure to subscribe, like, leave a comment. We love reading your comments. Sammy does too. She loves hearing what you guys have to say. And we are so grateful that you chose to watch today. Thank you so much. Aloha!